about that. I think it flipped me around. But so thank you again for, for sharing your candor with us this evening. So the first question I want to throw out to you is, how long have you been program director? And sort of what are the biggest lessons that you have sort of gleaned in doing in this role over however long you've been in it?
Yeah, so I've been program director now for 4 years, and I served also as the associate program director for a year under Jeff Geller, who was the program director before Bill Levine. So in 4 years, I've definitely gleaned some lessons and lessons learned. And number one is the importance of advocacy and mentorship. And so understanding that in my role, I get the honor to help residents get to their next fellowship, and I help fellows get to the next job, and I help medical students, find their way and land the appropriate or best residency that they can get. So I think learning about the importance of advocacy and mentorship, it can't be under highlighted. Number two, learning about just building a culture. Culture is so hard to build, but it comes from behavior from the top down, and building the right culture ultimately just makes the best program. So trying to work on that. And number three, I think this year in particular, lessons learned about fairness, especially with redeployment during COVID, and making sure that that there's fairness in distribution and fairness in the way senior residents and junior residents feel that everyone is chipping in and everyone's doing their job, and so fairness.
That's I think you hit up on a handful of really awesome points. And one thing I want to ask you, and especially knowing that Columbia was sort of, and New York Presbyterian was sort of in the thick of it all, especially when COVID hit. What sort of decisions, what sort of things were you having to share with the residents, with faculty at that point in time, just in terms of sort of program structural changes at that point, or program structural adaptations, I should say, that were
Yeah.
taking place at that point that you think are going to help you during the course of this cycle and in the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredibly complex and evolving time at that time when so the pandemic was breaking in New York City, and a lot of emphasis was on minimizing risk, but also providing care. And so there was concepts of creating platoons of residents where if one team got sick, then there'd be other teams that were protected. Um, and so we skeletonized our crew because we could provide excellent care. We focused on telemedicine, and we activated our residents to start providing more telemedicine care. And we really took a closer look at like how many people actually had to be in front of a patient at a time, and
Right.
to provide the excellent care. And so it was about restructuring our entire schedule, restructuring call, restructuring the way that consults were seen, and then a lot of data gathering was sort of behind the scenes, and telemedicine was utilized when needed. And I can tell you, our residents were there taking care of patients who then ended up turning COVID positive while in the hospital, or they were never tested because that was not the policy at the time. So it was a time of a lot of risk, and I think our program definitely led the way in making sure we were taking care of everyone, chipping in and providing ICU level and ER level care, but also minimizing the risk and exposure so that we didn't spread the disease.
That's absolutely amazing to hear. And I think that, I still remember students messaging me when, New York Presbyterian was being featured and a certain someone was being featured during the NFL draft. And then obviously during the entire time, Columbia sort of at the forefront of, hey, how are things being managed in terms of just with the epicenter being there at the time. And so
Yeah.
it's absolutely amazing to hear y'all were able to make, adjustments to ensure patient care, but also to ensure that the residents were getting getting the education that they needed. One thing that I want to sort of jump into, which I know is sort of the white elephant in the room always, which is how are you and what guidance are you giving with regards to your students at least Columbia, and what you might share as far as what are you looking for in prospective applicants, especially
Yeah.
knowing that COVID is having major effects this entire cycle?
Yeah, so traditionally we look for students who are passionate in something in life, and if the passion is ortho, that's great. But if it's a passion in something else, that demonstrates that they are able to succeed and be passionate about something. That's number one. Number two, we typically like to see successful clerkship grades and experiences on clerkships. But obviously this year, a lot of students are not spending time on the wards in medicine or surgery clerkships. So we're going to have to sort of configure the way we sort of evaluate students. And so a lot of it's going to come from letters of rec from your home program. A lot of it's going to come from the body of work through the beginning of your medical school. And I can allay some fears in that, step one scores are not the hurdle that you have to get over, because there's so much more to a person than a single grade or a single number from one test.
So that's a perfect segue for me to ask the following question. What do you think about sort of the step one screens that have been used in prior years at many programs, and how do you think that will change, at least in your mind, over the next couple of years as step one goes to pass fail?
Yeah, so in years past we'd received about 750 applications, and it's very easy and it's attractive just to create a bar, and it saves a lot of time by creating a cutoff. But honestly, there's tons of applicants and students who are so well qualified who get cut out, and so that bar has been way lowered, and we start to look more at the body of the application itself. So how does that change with regard to making step one sort of pass fail? Well, it's going to put all this emphasis on step two, and all of a sudden now it's one more number. And so
right.
In years past, students who had sort of had a bad day on step one could demonstrate success in step two and make up for it. Well, now step one's going to be pass fail, and really step two is all you're going to have. And a lot of medical schools are going to pass fail grading, or grading without sort of distinction. So those applications are going to be really difficult to sort of sort out.
Right.
What's going to happen to the application cycle? Well, I think students are going to apply to too many programs. It's going to dilute applicants who want to go to a program, because it'll dilute their sort of signal or emphasis on wanting to go there, and it's going to be very hard for them to distinguish themselves and indicate to programs that they really want to go there. So that is the big struggle right now. And how does a student sort of tell a program, hey, I've applied, but not only have I applied, like, I want to go there. This is like, you're my top five, and do that within a way that's going to be received by the program. So in ortho, I think we're struggling. In otolaryngology, they're talking about signaling. I don't know if you've heard about signaling.
Yeah, I've heard about it a little bit, but maybe you can shed some light on what that is for those who are not as familiar.
Yeah, I mean, so signaling is a way that an applicant would signal to the program their interest beyond just applying, and the number of signals a student would have would be limited. So, for example, like 5 signals. So the student would apply to 25 programs, signal to their top 5, hey, you received my love letter or my signal.
Right.
And the program then would understand that was a sign that they really had a strong interest. There's some caveats. The programs wouldn't know which other programs the student had given their signals, and the signals number is definitely limited to a certain number, so that it creates a value to it.
Yeah, so I've talked to other students that Dr. Levine has sent my way who are interested in other specialties, who have sort of brought this up to me too. And I see Dr. Levine is chiming in right now, down at the bottom there. Yeah, that
no signaling in ortho
this year. But yeah, I think it is certainly an interesting time as far as really sort of unmasking, like, hey, what else in the application should we be looking at and emphasizing, like you were mentioning earlier? One thing, there was a question that came up earlier that I want to make sure I ask is, are there step one cutoffs at Columbia specifically? And if there were, what were they? And this year, are they changing, or have they changed thus far in terms of how you guys are going to apply or review the applications coming up?
I mean, there was not a strict cutoff. There was definitely a lot of flexibility. There were some guidelines. but I don't think we're gonna. I don't think the bar is changing, even though at least it's a transition. I don't think it's going to change this year very much for us, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there was no cutoff. How about that?
No cutoff. Okay, that's fair. And you know, and just for people who are thinking about that, I think it's really important. And I also want to say hello to Dr. Levine as well. I think he just said hello to you as well. And the bottom line is that the step one, it gets so much emphasis. It is one piece of the puzzle, you know, and it will now be sort of obviously going to pass fail. Now step two, as you said, will probably get emphasis. And
Hmm.
there's lots of things to sort of be looking at. And you know, I think the thing that often, and I, as someone who didn't match the first time, I would ask you, so how do you guys view reapplicants specifically, especially those who didn't match this past year or haven't matched multiple times in the last couple of years themselves?
No, that's a great question. And students who didn't match one year have a lot of anxiety about the next year. Sorry, my screen went a little dark. Can you see me still?
Yes, I
All
sure
right,
can.
perfect. So, I mean, we intentionally matched a resident who was a reapplicant, and he's one of our better residents and probably top of his class. And um, when you don't match one year, you have such an intensity and drive to succeed that it actually may put you at an advantage in residency. At least that's what I feel. If you're the right if you're the right student who didn't match, um, you know the match is a algorithm, and if you sort of caught the tail end of something unfair and you didn't match, then you know it's nothing, not your fault, and it's not the program's fault. It just didn't match up. Obviously, there are students who don't match who probably should be in another field,
Right.
but so how does Columbia view reapplications? We look at those applications. We try to find out why the student didn't match the first time, and if they meet all the qualifications, and they, they we do some sort of fact checking and background checking, make sure everything's is up to par. Like they can be great residents. Sometimes best in their class.
That's awesome, and I say as someone who reapplied and then you know matched the following year. Granted, not at Columbia. I'm still. I should probably tell Dr. Levine I'm disappointed I didn't get an interview all these years later. But the the but the interesting thing is that yes, like there's obviously you know you have to work to bolster your application, and that I think is you know it's not the end of the world, and certainly with strategy in place, I think that can be really helpful. So in y'all's mind, does it make a difference whether they do a research year or do a prelim year specifically?
Taz, I think we have another little lag time. Um,
Oh,
but does it matter if someone takes a year off or delays a year and then does a research year? And I think that definitely plays in a lot of students' favor.
okay.
Are we back? Are we back live? You think?
Yes, yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. Yeah. So I think bolstering your application or taking a research year, if done for the right reasons, definitely is an advantage, and it allows the student really to commit to orthopedics and to delve into some topics and confirm that that is indeed what their passion is and indeed what they want the rest of their life to be in a professional sense. So, you know, looked on positively, not a negative.
That's great to hear, and I would totally echo the same sentiment. Do you think there's a difference between, so for those who didn't match and who are reapplying, do you think there's a difference in terms of those who did a prelim year versus those who do a research year alternatively?
Yeah. So, you know, I think everyone has a different story and a different reason why they may have taken a prelim year or, um, you know, didn't match, then reapplied. So I think it's a case by case basis. Um, it's hard to draw some sort of overarching conclusions, but I think it's just case by case.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that because you know obviously I've had some students say, oh my you know my folks have told me not to do a research year. I've had some folks who say, oh I've totally been told not to do a prelim year, and I couldn't agree more that it should be decided just like with mentoring and advising and all that it needs to be very individualized and what makes the most sense in the context of your application and the
Hmm.
strengths and or potential weaknesses. So you know I want to sort of pivot, I want to ask you one more question before we pivot to kind of
Yeah.
showcasing Colombia a little bit more. Tell me, I've had a lot of osteopathic students, also IMG students, reach out to me and ask me, hey, like, how are osteopathic students kind of viewed upon by programs now that the match is merged? And then what about international medical grads, whether coming from the Caribbean or otherwise? How do y'all view those two, sets of applicants as well?
Yeah, I mean, we look at their applications for sure. We don't have a great history of matching those students, but I think that we're open-minded and we look at the whole picture. But I can tell you that we don't have the best history of matching those students. So just from afar and an overarching view, like that does seem to be a negative factor. But I can tell you, we look at each person individually.
Okay, and that's great to know. I think this is really sort of a great question as far as a segue that's been brought up is how do you, you were talking about the kind of the culture and fostering that as something you've learned early on. What sort of, initiatives or what sort of measures have you and, and others have taken there to sort of help establish that, the culture in the residency program that you were describing earlier?
Right. So a lot of culture could be related to professionalism. So professionalism from the top down. Other things of culture, like our residency program is very much like a family. So from weekend barbecues to happy hours to athletic events, we sort of work hard, play hard type mentality. Um, and then the culture of sort of valuing our sort of three pillars of patient care, uh, education, and research, and demonstrating that we do totally value those pillars helps just breed the culture that we want. Sort of our mission to build the best orthopedic residents who do incredible research that's going to be groundbreaking, take care of patients better than anyone else in the country, and be incredible educators. And when you have all those three, all of a sudden you become a national leader. And so if you look at a lot of the alumni out of Columbia, their presence of their societies, they're just leaders. They're team doctor for USA Olympics and a number of things. So making sure we keep our North Star with those three sort of pillars and just sort of keeping the culture directed in that direction really is a recipe for success.
So that, I mean, that sounds absolutely amazing, and I'm getting a little inspired. Maybe I should like throw my hat back into the ring for like residency
Come on.
applications. Yeah. What would you describe on sort of that note? What would you say are the three sort of either highlights or three major takeaways or strengths you would want to really showcase to applicants, whether it's via, an interview season or otherwise, that you would like to share with people listening today?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of the three sort of highlights would be uh, sort of we were an orthopedic family, so the camaraderie is something you just can't fake. So if you um, sort of spend time with us or you call on friends who know us or visit with us, that's what you're going to hear. Um, and number two is sort of our commitment to excellence and our three pillars. Um, um, and then I sort of go back to our first sort of discussion we had right when we opened up this live event, which is sort of the importance of advocacy and mentorship, so that we can get you to the next level. So I think those would be sort of the highlights of Columbia Ortho um, in my mind.
That's absolutely amazing. And in this particular cycle, and I know some of this, but I think not everyone is aware. What is Columbia doing to sort of, as far as outreach to students, knowing that away rotations are unavailable and so on? What kinds of things are y'all doing to kind of engage the students from afar?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of we've developed the CLIP program, which is sort of our virtual sub internship, and CLIP stands for um, Columbia Longitudinal Information Program. But basically, it's a season long interaction with us, and it's a voluntary thing. We run it on Sunday nights, and we have all of our residents on. We have our faculty speaking on topics which can both be academic and or soft, social skills, and diversity in orthopedics, you name it. And we get, students who are interested in orthopedics and interested in applying to us to be able to see what our program's like, and learn about our residents and learn about our culture and see what our attendings' thoughts are on some of these important topics that are, changing the face of the U.S. right now, so that they can understand or feel like that Columbia is going to be the right program for them. And Columbia might not be the best program for everyone. It's definitely it's a match, and so we want students to sort of understand what we're like and what we care about, and what our culture is, so that we can bring in the best and the next best.
That is kind of that really brings up an important point to me, because I know you train there as well, and sort of now at the program lead and the program head, what sort of things are y'all, obviously lots of great things, lots of great strengths, and I love the notion of culture. What are y'all doing to sort of, what kinds of things are you working to improve upon? What are you doing to sort of, hey, take it that much further, right? So and based upon what you saw when you were, in residency training to now and in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of our sort of areas where we're just going to take it to the next level are going to be in skill evaluation, and I think technology is driving this. And over the last decade, skill evaluation was sort of a feedback from your attending, either verbally or on a form, saying, you're competent to nail an intertrochanteric hip fracture. And I think we're going to get beyond that, and we're going to get to actual either virtual or technologically evaluating a resident's three-dimensional coordination, in addition to sort of the subjective feedback from the faculty. So we're using the ABOS skill evaluation form. I don't know, Tabs, if you're familiar with that, but we're using that just as the initial one. But we've started using some VR and AR devices, and developed an arthroscopy skill course to really give our students give our residents feedback on where they stand. Because as you go through residency, it's very hard to compare yourself to others, because oftentimes you're alone in the room with the attending, or you're there with a senior resident and you're not with someone who's your same level. So you don't really get a lot of feedback on, am I progressing at the same level as my peers? Am I doing the right stuff? And sort of giving some objective measurement to that with some of the new technologies like AR and VR.
Oh, that's absolutely awesome, and I know obviously there's engagement with one of the VR companies, Precision OS, and I think that's incredible. And I know, and can you tell me a little bit about these kind of, because I heard about it recently from in part Dr. Levine, but from some of the residents too. So tell me about the skills lab that y'all have there. So that sort of training facility that's accessible to the residents.
Yeah, it's for graduate medical education as well as medical students, and it's a multi-million-dollar facility from Columbia and New York Presbyterian. So cadaver labs, dry labs, wet labs, managers, instruments, you name it. We've partnered with industry at times. We can run courses there. So not only is it education for students and residents, but also for local other surgeons and attendings. So it's really an incredible resource. I see Dr. Levine texting about the Perry Initiative. In September, we're hosting the 4th Perry Initiative in Women in Orthopedics. So I do want to highlight that our program has like a very high percentage of women in orthopedics, and we support and foster, and we're training the next leaders in orthopedics who will lead the charge. So very excited about that.
That's wonderful. And a question that came up, and Dr. Levine has in part answered a couple of those things, but just for you to also touch upon it too, what sort of measures have been taken to sort of enhance the diversity and inclusion sort of perspective within the program?
Yeah, I mean, we value that our residency is representative of our nation and our culture. So, we look at all applications equally, but we ensure that we have we represent everyone. And in areas where there's been underrepresentation, we may give that application a little bit of a tick up, just to make sure that we we match you. And we want we want underrepresented students to apply to Columbia because we want to train you to be a leader, and we want you.
That's absolutely wonderful. And I saw that you also said that Nth Dimensions, or y'all are going to sponsor Nth Dimensions, I guess like maybe next year, from what it looks like. And and I would also, just from even from a bird's eye view and a third party observer, it's incredible to see the diversity just in the photos on Instagram amongst the residents, and even in some of my students who are in clip, and the engagement, and from it, kind of how engaging people are. Sort of the diversity of the residents themselves is absolutely incredible. It's really awe-inspiring for me as well. So wonderful to hear all these things. I want to ask one of those kind of critical questions that lots of students ask. Obviously most students hope that on day one of residency they're going to get the knife and going to start cutting. So tell me a little bit about what the operative sort of experience is, and or the clinical exposure. Is it more of a graded approach? Is it sort of more hit the ground running? How does that work at Columbia specifically?
I think we have a mixed model. So we have some mentorship sort of rotations where you one-on-one with the attending, and your progression with a surgical autonomy depends on how your interaction is with that attending. We have other services like hip and knee where there's a junior resident, a senior resident, and then the attending. And so in the beginning, you'll be doing more of the rounding and orders entry, but as you demonstrate that you can, take hold of the knife, you're going to start to get those opportunities. It's as a PGY2, you're going to be operating. As a PGY3, hopefully you'll be operating independently on basic bread and butter cases. As a PGY4 and 5, we want you actually leading the junior resident through the case, so that if you're able to teach the surgery to a junior resident, you understand it so much more as a senior resident. And we also have some fellows, and so we have some fellows who are credentialed as attendings, which is actually an incredible learning experience for senior residents to see what it's like to struggle as a junior attending, and to be able to ask very honest questions about why things aren't going as well as when the senior attending is there. And so pushing people to their comfort level, or to the edge of their comfort level, and just a little bit farther, typically gets you, the most education, but not letting you flail, and not totally alone in the room, and potentially harming patients, and really not getting any education out of it.
That's I think that's amazing, because I think a lot of times it's people ask, or students will ask, hey, I want to specifically go to a program where I'm just going to get sort of I'm going to start from day one, and and that is okay to an extent, but like I always say, you have to learn the alphabet before you can start learning words, and before you start learning to read and actually reading books and doing everything, just like you have to learn how to walk before you can run. And there's so many nuances, especially from the anatomy section, especially in orthopedics, where anatomy is everything. So tell me a little bit about how the lab sort of gets integrated into sort of cultivating this operative experience, as well as just in terms of the kind of independence and sort of clinical or operative acumen too.
Right. So every summer we run sort of an anatomy course, and this is a pro section on cadaver, where residents do all the exposures that are in Hoppenfelds, and then they go through all the structures, so that when they're in the operating room, they are facile at all approaches, and they've seen it before, and you're not seeing it for the first time on a person, you're seeing it for the first time on a cadaver. And so utilizing the resources of Columbia University and the NYP through the Vagilis Education Center, but also we have a arthroscopy lab on the orthopedic department floor. Plus we have a bioskills lab if you want to practice, knot tying and sawbones. So really, I think almost like 3 different opportunities to practice outside of a clinical OR.
That's really awesome. I'm getting jealous. But I think it just highlights the fact that and for students to understand that anatomy and orthopedics is everything, and you can't just cut just to cut. And so really finding programs like Columbia where there is emphasis on the anatomy side of it all, I think is really, really, important, and should be something that you ask when you are, looking at different programs that suit your interests and you think you can thrive at specifically. Tell me you kind of highlighted it before, but what is the kind of chemistry amongst the residents and, residents and attendings and residents themselves like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes back to the culture of the program. And we're trying to break down the hierarchy that exists in a lot of programs. And no task is too small for any single person. Attendings can sweep the room if they want to get it going faster. Um, and so what is the relationship with residents? You know, they do events outside of work. They're buddies. The residents and faculty carpool to the surgery center sometimes. It's a very, I mean, that's what it is. Hey, you want to ride over
That's
to the
awesome.
surgery center? I'll pick you up.
Yeah.
I'll bring the coffee. Just be there at 6:30. You know, I think that's the culture of our program, and the faculty are likewise very close. And there's a lot of faculty sort of development that goes on, and especially like among the junior faculty. We meet up a couple times a year, talk about how our practices are developing, what we wish we had done differently, how we're utilizing athletic trainers or MAs, what works, what doesn't work, because you develop through all parts of your career, and having mentorship and guidance and advocacy doesn't end when you get into residency or when you get your fellowship. It only continues. So I think our culture is incredibly fostering and developing. And I think I learned this from Bill Levine with setting short-term and long-term goals, and then talking about them with your mentor, and how do you get there? And oftentimes, if you identify them and create a path, you're going to get there. You're going to get there at Columbia.
That's amazing. And it sounds like you certainly have established that. One of your residents just chimed in. He was able to take a ride with you. Uh, two questions that came up earlier is one is, from a, obviously research being one of the pillars that you were mentioning in terms of the culture and sort of the North Star. When you guys are looking at residency applications, how important is that research aspect when you're looking at the application in general, as well as ortho specific research?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and I think we step back and we say, if you went to a medical school that has a lot of research opportunity, then we would expect you to be doing research. If you came from somewhere which didn't have the resources, and then we're not going to expect you to have a lot of research. That's the first. Number two, once you've done the research, we want you to sort of own it and know it. So we want you to be passionate about what you're studying and not just latching onto a project and putting your name on it. So during interviews, you're going to get asked, well, what about the project about the patellofemoral joint, and what did you learn? And we want you to have some perspective and be able to describe your research, because that's really the true value of it. It's not getting your name on a paper or making your CV a little longer. It's about sort of pushing the envelope of medical knowledge and contributing and having that open discussion about disease, and ultimately it improves patient care. So yeah, we value research. It's one of our three sort of pillars. We expect you to do some, especially if you're coming from a program that has the resources. But if you don't have a lot, that's okay. And the quality of your research matters, and understanding and being able to describe it is important.
That's I think you hit the nail on the head with regards to research, because if it's on your application, whether it is the hobby at the bottom of your ERAS or whether it's the one paper that you're 11th author on, you need to understand your application inside and out. And so that way you can speak articulately and eloquently about it. So with that in mind, do you think that if you see lots of non-ortho research on the application, which is another question I get asked, is that a deterrent for you? Are you like, they're not as interested in ortho? Or are you looking at it more from the perspective, hey, what have they learned from said research? Because, hey, maybe they decide orthopedics a little bit later on in their medical school training.
Yeah, I mean, usually it comes with a great story of like, well, I was going to be a cardiologist, but I didn't love it, and I spent a month in the OR with so and so in ortho, and that's where I found my true passion, and I realized that was it. People come to that realization late, and that's okay. You don't have to be, coming out of the womb and in the cradle, with a hammer and a saw. it's okay to have other passions and finally identify it. So it's not a red flag. I think it demonstrates that that the student has a passion for doing research and has found their own pathway. So um, that's how we
Uh,
sort of approach that.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, some orthopedic research is nice, but granted, if you were really committed to another specialty before ortho and didn't have a lot of time, then that's understandable.
Right. Someone had asked about hey, are there DO faculty and or, DO residents? And I think Dr. Levine sort of answered that, hey, there's two
Okay.
DO faculty
Yep.
and a DO fellow as well, but no residents yet. Anything else to kind of share in that way specifically?
That's right. And those DO faculty are some of our most beloved faculty. So it just goes to show that those initials don't really mean a whole lot right now. At least it doesn't mean that much at Columbia in terms of discriminating at all. Um, but if you take a 30,000-foot view, we don't have DO residents. So that's what it is right now.
Okay. Tell me about sort of the research involvement. And obviously, Columbia is kind of a powerhouse for research. And so, in terms of how early residents like, is there a dedicated research rotation? Are residents, aside from their like ACGME requirement, are they like kind of jumping into jumping into the deep end right away? How early do they get involved, and what sort of things do they have at their disposal to get involved with?
Yeah, we've really created a system to not let anyone fall through the cracks and really foster research early because as a PGY2 you get really busy clinically seeing
Yeah.
consults. So as an intern, we're going to get you hooked up with a mentor, a research mentor, not a mentor for life or a life coach, just like a research mentor, help you identify topics that you want to look at and start plugging into teams. We've done a really good job at creating subspecialty specific sort of resident teams that really can churn and burn through a lot of good research under the direction of faculty. And so getting an intern on one of those teams, learning how to work within a resident research team is really critical. We also have our interns present at grand rounds during their intern year, one of their projects, and we expect them to have written the IRB, gotten approval, gone through sort of the planning, the budget, grant writing, and really push them to start because research can take a long time. So our residents get exposure and research immediately. It's not through a research rotation, but it's like through almost like a mentorship and buddy system within sort of subspecialty division research teams. I'll give you an example, like our spine resident research team right now, those really interested in spine are, I think they published as a group like 80 publications last year. So incredibly prolific. And
That
like
is quite prolific. Right.
incredibly prolific. And listen, we've got 6 incredible spine faculty and 3 leaders in the world in spine, Larry Lanke, Dan Rue, and Ron Lehman. But it comes from great ideas, great sort of direction, but then a lot of incredible hard work by residents to get the job done and to ask the right questions and to learn how to spin the paper so that it's meaningful.
That's absolutely incredible. And I would also, as someone who does, who's very, very research interested and so on myself, I would encourage students listening that, hey, even if it's research of any sort, it's a great way to develop your critical thinking skills. It's a great way to demonstrate your team building skills and even your leadership and ability to take projects from start to finish, whether it's orthopedics related or not. And that is something that I encourage in everybody. And so students ask me all the time, hey, I don't have ortho research. Is that a problem? I say, no, it's not a problem, but it's certainly a way to break the ice in terms of demonstrating your interest. So the fact that a program like Columbia has this sort of, this accessibility to these kinds of, research powerhouses is absolutely incredible. From one thing that comes up a bunch is what's the best way to engage as a student? So I'm assume for a second I'm applying and I have fortunately missed the boat on CLIP
Yeah.
because Dr. Levine said, no, you can't join tabs. So what would you suggest if I'm a student at, I don't have a home program, or even if I do, and would you say that I should really jump into these virtual rotations? Should I focus on programs more locally? And finally, how do I engage these programs from afar? Especially if
Yeah.
I'm really interested in them, sort of what's sort of your thought on how best to proceed across those three sort of topics?
I mean, even if you're gonna even if the program says the program is full, I would send the email to the administrator and the program director and or chairman. Hey, I'm so and so, and I'm really interested in your program. I realize that I may have missed the opportunity for a virtual rotation, or you guys are all full, but that's like the icebreaker, and you got to do it. And then you should have your advocates and mentors sort of call on your behalf or email on your behalf, something to just keep pushing, demonstrating the interest beyond just clicking the button and applying. And then I think sort of reaching out to other residents or reaching out to residents in the program and sort of creating a buddy is the next best way. Um, a lot of students don't realize that the residents who they interact with on their sub-Is, which didn't happen this year, but those residents are some of the students' strongest advocate at the ranking session after interviews. So the residents are critical in a student's ability to match because we want you to be part of the family. And we value the residents' opinion about students incredibly, as we do our faculty and as we do like the interview scores. But so a student can do can demonstrate a lot of interest by engaging a resident and asking about the program, even
Right.
if it's informally, not through a virtual rotation or through the CLIP program here at Columbia.
No, that's all amazing to hear, and this is exactly those same things I've been suggesting to students as well. If one thing that came up earlier today, as someone was asking, is how if I don't, let's just say I'm an orphan student without a home program, and I don't have a lot of people who are super well connected around me, but who are writing my letters and so on, and someone's willing to advocate. Is it reasonable for them to just send an email to Dr. Jobin because I'm particularly interested in Colombia, and like on my behalf? Is that reasonable even if you don't know them, or do you think it has less of an effect if the connection isn't previously already there?
I mean, I think it's worth doing, but I think the connection is valuable. So trying to find the connection to make that initial introduction is helpful. But the blind email is not. It gets read and it gets looked at, and so it's not impossible. Um, and so I think the engagement and sort of demonstrating the interest is really important. And so you got to break the ice somehow. So even if you're from an orphan program, you don't have a lot of advocates, your chairman retired, super small school, what have you, you got to go for it. You got to go for what you want. Um,
As much as you can. I mean, like, leave
Shoot for the
no
stars.
stone unturned, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Leave no stone unturned, especially this year. Do you all emphasize the narrative letter, or the SLOR,
Yeah,
or
it's a good
sort of
question.
both? And especially now that, there's no way, so it's, I am assuming that the narrative may get scrutinized a little bit more. And where should the letters be all ortho? Should they be a non, or is it okay if it's non-ortho, or sort of some mix of both?
Yeah, so I mean, as part of the chord, I respect the SLOR, the standardized letter, and the E-SLOR, the electronic standardized letter. But I can tell you that um, the real important part of that is the narrative. And so we value those words and how people have written about you. And um, the standardized letter has some ranking of percentages like best student in 10 years or top this year or
Right.
top 25 or bottom 50. If you look at those letter writers, the faculty who are writing those letters, almost all students are in this like best in this year or best in the month, and almost no one's in the bottom half, even though 50% of their letters should be in the bottom half. So you got to take the SLOR with a grain of salt, and we really do value the narrative. So my advice to students, you should have both, and you can combine them because the SLOR does have the narrative section portion. Um, and you can pick and choose to which programs you send the SLOR versus just the narrative or the combined.
Are you suggesting to the Columbia students to have both? Or are you saying, hey, just do what you're saying, just get both and send one or the other, depending on what the program sort of requires, if you will?
Yeah, so get both, but or have them combined because some programs will require the SLOR and some
Right.
don't. And I think the narrative is incredibly powerful, and a lot of programs this year are going to be looking at the narrative letter um, because that's the only way they're going to get to know you, unless
Right.
you participate in a virtual sub internship.
Yeah, and one thing I want to kind of say is, and even especially with you being involved with CLIP, do you think that this, like, so if a student, one of my students, I have two of them who are in CLIP, they ask for a letter of rec from you
Hmm.
specifically. Do you think that whether it be the Columbia program or do you think whether it be some of these other virtual ways that are around, do you think it's a viable option to get a letter from one of these, kind of virtual ways? Or do you think it's not really so much for, you shouldn't really expect to get a letter. You should really be doing it for more of the engagement perspective with hopes that perhaps it might bolster or help your chance of getting an interview potentially?
Yeah, I think that the letter should probably come from your home program, and this year the court is only requiring two, but honestly, I think a lot of people will get three, including one from chairman. Um, and so I don't think you should expect to get a letter from a virtual sub-internship experience unless that virtual sub-intern experience has a lot of one-on-one time with the faculty who's going to write the letter. So, for example, for CLIP, I wouldn't expect the students to be asking our faculty for a letter, even though they're checking in every couple of weeks.
Right,
I don't think that's the expectation.
right. And I wouldn't, and I ask this because people have brought this up to me, and I say, listen, it's already hard enough to get to know people virtually, in a non-sub-I kind of fashion, and so if you can emphasize your home program, or even those programs locally that you've hopefully had a chance to get to know, then I think that's a little bit better in terms of getting the letters, the supportive letters that you're looking for.
Yeah.
We're nearing an hour, Dr. Jobin, and it's been an incredible conversation with you. I want to leave. Thanks, Dr. Lean, for chiming in or for hanging. Ask the kind of final question of, are there any sort of pieces of advice that you'd like to share, or pearls of wisdom you want to share with the students applying the cycle, and any sort of other highlights you want to share about Columbia specifically?
Yeah, so pearls to the applicants and students, be true to yourselves. Um, you guys have a lot of power in this process, and as a student, it may not feel that way at all. You may feel like you're getting thrown in this match, and you sort of just you don't have any control, but you really do. You really have a lot of control, and your control is how you engage with programs, how your advocates and mentors sort of get you in the face of these programs. And ultimately, your rank list impacts where you're going to go tremendously. And so, you guys are incredible, and you guys have a lot of value, and it's hard to perceive your value um, until you match, and then you realize that you guys are incredible. So, uh, stick up for yourself, advocate for yourself, get the best mentors, go for the top, go for your best program, because a lot of you guys will get there.
Well, that is, I couldn't have said it better myself, and it's a tumultuous process. So your insight is, especially this year, your insight, your wisdom is super helpful. I love this notion of culture. I love this notion of like advocacy and mentorship as well. Super dear, near and dear to me. So Dr. Jobin, thank you again so very much for joining us tonight. I appreciate. I know the students and even faculty and other residents watching appreciate it. I know you obviously have created such an amazing environment over at Columbia, and so it's very palpable. And so thank you for everything you're doing up in New York right now. So for everyone listening, again, thank you very much. Send me any other questions you may have. Don't hesitate to reach out. The recording of this Insta Live will be available up on the YouTube Ortho Mentor channel in the next couple of days. And again, stay safe and have a great night. And again, Dr. Jobin, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, guys. Stay safe. Thanks a lot,
All
Tabs.
right, you too. Stay safe as well. Bye.